Welcome all. Appreciate you tuning in. This is Dan Blatt's back here again with In Light of the Gospel. The reason I've started this podcast is because I love the gospel. It has affected me. It has transformed my life to a degree that I can't completely communicate. But I get to speak of this understanding of the gospel quite frequently. I get to preach routinely, and I have the pulpit. I have a platform where I can speak and share. But it doesn't escape me. I do realize that many people have been affected by the gospel as much or more than I have, but don't communicate it the way that I do. And I've come to realize that people can communicate the truth of the gospel in work. They can communicate the truth of the gospel in their marriage, in their child training, in their business. And that's why I've brought on today's guest. I've been looking forward to this for a little while. I know it's only my second episode, but I've got so many guys in mind that I want to talk to. And this was one that I'm pretty excited about. So Willy Penner, many of you will know him from his kitchen business, Stone Mill. That's the proper name, the full name of it.
Stone Mill Cabinetry.
Stone Mill Cabinetry. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Willy is because I've known him for a long time. I'm comfortable with him, so I knew we could have a decent conversation. But I've seen him early on in his Christian life, struggling like all of us do. Started a business with his brothers. It kind of went sour. I don't know all the details there. Maybe he'll share some of that. Maybe he won't. And then started from ground zero, like from scratch. Even lost your income completely for a while, lost your business completely, went bankrupt if I understand correctly.
Yep.
Hopefully I'm not sharing too much.
No.
And now I would say it's not too soon to say that he has a very successful business. A moderately successful business.
Yeah,
you can go there.
Yeah, definitely we're doing well. Much better than we did before.
Okay.
But
so would you mind maybe starting a little bit earlier than your business and kind of introduce yourself a little bit, maybe your family upbringing, what your work ethic was like, and then ultimately how you came to know Jesus, and then we'll translate that into...
Sure, yeah. So we grew up in Mexico, as a lot of our background did, but at the age of 4 we moved to Campeche, which we had a very terrible experience there.
I've heard about it.
So I don't know what all, I'm sure a lot of that shaped our lives, but yeah, we were there for, in the 8-month period we were there, we had a tornado take down our house. We built a new house, and we had a flood, which was Hurricane Albert in 1887, I believe it was, or 19, yeah, I'm not that old, and then we moved to Canada, which I think was either God worked that out, because through that, I think most of us got saved coming here, hearing the gospel, going to the old colony.
Most of your family would now be, you would consider them born again Christians?
Yeah, I mean, most of them, yeah. So, yeah, I think that was a big influence. I think that was probably one of the best things that happened to us through that whole tragedy. And
coming to Canada with nothing and starting over.
Yeah, the plan was to go back, but we only stayed we just end up staying for...
How old were you when your parents moved over?
I was 5 years old.
Oh, so you don't really remember Mexico much?
I do. I have a very early memory. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, there was a lot of experiences there that kind of really left you, a lot of anxiety, right, through all those times. So, but anyway, we moved on and went to the Old Colony School. And
I remember knowing you and your family a little bit there.
Yeah. So, yeah, there was a lot of things we had to learn, and especially language and all that, which I think we were, as everyone else, or most of the people there, learning. I don't know, maybe it was a 50%.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so that shaped us too, and as I got out of school, let me just go back a little bit. So during school, my heart and intent was always to serve God. I had a real desire to do what was right.
As a young boy,
that was always my intention. And I think as everybody does, you look at people that are going way off, way out, you just sort of say to yourself, I'll never do that, right? I couldn't do that, right? But all of a sudden, I think I'll just jump ahead a little bit. at age 19, I found myself right where I thought I would never be, right? In despair, not knowing where to turn with my life. And so
drugs, parties,
no
alcohol.
drugs. There was some parties and alcohol for sure, but it was just a bit of a desperate, dead state where you see your life not going anywhere and just the potential of it being a ruined life. And so at that point, when I started realizing it, I started going back, or fortunately at the time there was a class reunion, and I was already on the brink of wanting something different, but I didn't really know anymore what direction to turn. And I think the Old Colony, as I was going there as a kid, really it was like the schoolmaster to lead you to Christ. You know what is right. You're taught the gospel, but you're always, in a sense, pointed to the law, right? And well, you do right, but there was a lot of the gospel there too.
It was quite a revival school almost, right? Where people got saved and left the Old Colony, which seems like what's happened to you as well. Yeah,
so I count myself very blessed to have been able to experience.
Some teachers influence you, or other school children?
Yes, for sure. I think it was, Tina Bergen, which is Tina Good now.
I've heard that so many times.
Yeah, so she had a real influence on my life, as many others, and that was one of the defining moments too. When I went back to that class reunion, she asked me what I forget exactly what she asked me, but anyway, if I was a Christian.
Okay.
And that, I think that night at home I accepted the gift of salvation.
Interesting.
I didn't fully understand everything, but I knew that Jesus had died for me and my sins were paid for, and from there I was, free. Whereas so many nights I was in fear, in guilt, like a lot of people, but from that point on I was free, right?
I find it interesting how many times I've heard the story like that. I was involved with a similar situation where there was a young man attending the choir, the Thiessen Girls choir back then. I was sitting next to him. I was recently saved. I wasn't a youth anymore. I was married, had our first baby, and I was sitting next to him, and I turned to him and said, "Hey, are you born again?" It's just a simple question. Never even thought that I should be witnessing to him or evangelizing, and apparently I had no idea, but it just struck him to the core. Like, what's the big deal? It's just a simple question. Have you never thought about whether or not you're a Christian? But something about somebody directing a question at you, that's a good means of encouragement for someone to evangelize, right? Just simply ask a question.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I've asked that question to other people too. But at that point, when she asked me that, I went there. If I would not have wanted something better, I wouldn't have gone there. But I was already sort of sick of my life. Actually, I had just turned 19. I had just become legal age. But it was a weird feeling because everything changed for me, because now I was legally allowed to do all the stuff, and it had a very strange impact. It wasn't like, okay, now I'm finally able to, I'll go, right? But it was, now I can, and now
You didn't want to?
It's like, yeah.
Interesting.
So I don't know exactly why.
Maybe it's partially psychological, where before, when you weren't allowed to, you wanted to, but also you got saved right at the same time.
Yeah, just after 19.
So I remember coming to yours and Helen's wedding. If we can kind of jump into that a little bit. I'm sure there's so much in your life story. I know you guys have gone through some trials and difficulties there, and I don't know how much we need to get into there, but how old were you when you got married?
I was 23, and
so only 4 years later.
Yeah, and the week of our honeymoon, I was 24. It was my birthday.
Okay.
So 4 years later.
And you did a similar transition to me. You went from Old Colony, and then I went to the Redicops, but you went straight to Vienna Church.
I went to Redicops too.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, we were there.
Is that when you left Old Colony?
Yep. So we left Old Colony, went to Mr. Redicops. We're there for, what was it? A year and a half, maybe. I'm not exactly sure, but then we went to Vienna.
For some reason, I don't recall you being at Redicops, but that's the
the
same thing we did.
I was in with all the prayer meetings.
And you were still single then, because you got married
in
attending the Vienna church.
Yeah.
And so we went through a lot of the same stuff. We got legalistic. We got very hardcore on outward appearance, and got into a church where they preached the gospel and they were very passionate, very excited, witnessing on the streets and all kinds of stuff like that. But at the same time, an awful lot of pressure put on you to perform and to act a certain way, to look a certain way, to live up to these godly standards of praying a certain time, reading a certain time. I was, very self-willed, so I appeared to be successful at times, right?
Yeah.
And I always respected you. I assumed you were doing well, but I know it led to a lot of struggle for you as well.
Yeah, it did. I don't cope well under that kind of pressure. Like, I don't like to, I think a lot of it was me. It was just me not knowing how to deal with that sort of pressure. But I always felt like I needed to perform not for God, but for everyone else. And now I couldn't live a life that was just freely worshiping God, which I think a large extent was just my fault. The way I had some
Nobody
stuff
else
to deal
to
with.
blame,
Yeah.
but that culture.
Obviously,
that
there was still pressure to perform that way, but
some people thrived under it.
Yeah.
And some people were squashed.
I didn't thrive under that.
So I stepped out of that system after hearing some really good news about the gospel, recognizing how free I was in Christ, that righteousness imputed, being dead to sin and free from sin and alive unto God. That kind of stuff just like opened my eyes to the point where I'm like, I can't keep living like this. I'm telling people to come to Jesus, but they're looking at the people that I hang out with and they're saying, if I come to Jesus, I'm going to look like that.
Yeah.
And so I started feeling like I can't live this, because they don't have to look like this to come to Jesus. They can just simply trust him, right?
Yeah.
And so we left and went to the Springfield Church. That's where we've been attending for 12 years now, or whatever it is. And you guys were there another 5 or 6 or 8 years.
I think 4 years. I think we've been at Springfield for 8 years.
8 years already. Wow.
I believe so.
Yeah, that would probably make sense.
Yeah, right around there anyway.
So, I mean, we're probably getting a little off track from the main gist of what I was hoping to share with you, but tell us a little bit about your first business. What was that all about? Or maybe I should even go further back than that. Why did you have this desire for business or woodworking? Which was the major push?
Well, I think it was maybe both. It's very interesting because as a kid, I remember I was probably about 10 years old and driving down through Tillsonburg on the 19 highway, seeing all the businesses, all the big industrial section there, and it dawned on me that those were all owned by just individual people. And where that kind of struck a chord with me, like, oh, I could own a business. And I think from early on, like, I've always been doing little things. I built furniture for friends.
You built a little crib bed for us once. So that would have been
like
14 years ago.
Yeah. So 15. I built bunk beds, and
so
that I was fortunate. My dad had a little wood shop, and he tinkered and he let me use his tools, so I learned there. But as far as business, even at 16, I would build cedar flower planters and bring them to a greenhouse that my sisters worked at. They would bring them to Toronto, and they would sell them there. They would take back orders. I would keep going I did that for one season. So I enjoy business. Obviously you
enjoy
the
wood as well.
Yeah, but there's always times where it's not as enjoyable. But yeah. So then, at probably right around age 20, me and my brothers decided to go into business together. We went into general contracting, which we all were very, very ignorant in business. We had no idea, right?
So it wasn't the idea of business necessarily that drove you, but...
I think we wanted to work together, and then as time went on, we started realizing what it was, and when you're a little bit deep in the water already.
Yeah.
So
tied together financially.
Yeah. So, which I think at that time it was mostly good, but we were not very ambitious. So I think I had a very wrong concept of business. So, which I think a lot of people do when they start out. You only start to realize realize when you're in a little bit of trouble.
I see a lot of young guys wanting to start their own business because they see their bosses doing well and they think, well, I know how to do everything he knows how to do.
Yeah.
So I'll just start on my own and then I'll make twice as much money.
Yeah.
And they jump in, and before they know it, they're in way over their heads. They don't realize the stress of it. They don't calculate the books right. They don't add up a budget. They have no concept of these things. And they go buy a brand new truck and put it on $800 payments when they're just getting started, and just on and on. They think that they can just do it because they see the money rolling in. Was that kind of what got you in trouble? I think yours was more a bad business deal that got your business in trouble.
Yeah,
once you started the kitchen cabinet company.
I think I always wanted to go into furniture, and our idea was that my brothers would continue construction and I would veer off in doing what I wanted to do. So we'd just get started for the capital. But so then what got us in trouble later, I think early on in business, we got into too much debt because we didn't, if you're in business, you're going to make money, right? Mm-hmm. So we got into bad debt. And later, 7 years later, we went bankrupt because we did a big job, like a retirement home, high-end retirement home, and we didn't get paid out everything.
It was a big chunk.
Yeah, it was a big chunk. But now looking back, we should have been able to weather it. And that was due to lack on our part of preparing properly, because we should have had a cushion, right?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of factors that led up to it. But I definitely can't totally blame the contractor. So
right, like knowing what you know now, had you organized things a little better and thought things through a little bit more, you would have probably been able to wiggle through that even.
Oh yeah. But yeah, it was just we had spent 6 months on that project, and we had said no to other work, which you shouldn't do. But
don't say no to work.
Not while you're on a big project. You have to keep it going. So then we should have had a little more. I always like to picture it. I climbed out too far on the limb and didn't wait for it to grow enough, right? And it just snapped, right?
I see.
So
and that was 7 years into the business.
Yeah, and then we always had work. I think in all that 7 years we had 2 weeks off from when we started.
So you're always busy.
Yeah, but there's many factors of not knowing how to price things, and probably not being ambitious enough either.
Right. So I know since then you worked for several other kitchen companies. You learned a lot more about the trade. You got better at the craft itself. But I noticed a major shift in the way that you were thinking about business. It wasn't haphazard anymore when you started your new business.
No.
You started small, very strategically. You had a plan. You had some ideas of how you were going to do this. And now you have how many employees?
10.
10 employees, and could easily keep growing as far as the way things look right now.
Yeah, so
what was the major shift in your thinking, do you think?
Well, I think a major thing was I failed my family, and so I couldn't let that happen again, right? Because me going bankrupt and losing everything, putting my family in that situation.
Tight spot for many years.
So that was rough. So I just figured, or my thinking was that this can't happen again. Right?
Okay.
So obviously there's always circumstances outside of our control, but the only way to do it was to do it right? So, and obviously we're still learning, and there's still mistakes made, but so we purpose not to borrow any money for equipment. So we paid everything cash. We started with the basics, right?
The saws you needed, and that was kind of
I actually hauled out a saw out of the dump. It was actually in our backyard. The concrete guys that were back there, John Ends.
Oh yeah. They
had an old saw that they didn't want. They had thrown on a junk pile. So I pulled that one out.
Fixed it up.
Put it in the shop.
I hope you young guys are listening.
Yeah, so it's called bootstrapping. That's what they call it. But So then I had that saw. I had an old little miter saw that I pulled out, and then, but the one thing I had still was the knowledge of the many, like the programming and all that, so I could restart, get those programs, and then just, I think a big help was that I could just send the files, have somebody cut it, and I did all the custom work. And then from there, I would, once the job was built, I would bring it to a finisher. He'd finish it. I'd take it back, rent a U-Haul, deliver to the job site, take my little Jetta with the tools, and go install the kitchen.
That's
right?
cool.
So
I know one of the gifts of the Spirit even is the gift of administration. And to me, it seems like someone who's able to see a project, organize, plan, put things together, make the project happen. And I don't know if yours was a spiritual gift or if it was just a very principled, disciplined way of coming about it at this time. You read books, you listened to podcasts, you approached things on a different level. All kinds of different things came into place. And I just found for myself looking at you, it just seemed like there was a whole different attitude towards business.
Yeah, I'm not a very disciplined person, I'll say that. But I think I had more knowledge and I knew what didn't work. So failure is not necessarily a failure. It's you've now stepped over from not knowing to knowing something, right? That didn't work. So now what do we got to do to make it different? In fact, I said that I would never ever do it again, right?
You would never do another
Never
business?
do service business again.
Interesting.
And then it took 3 years till I started up again.
Something shifted. Changed
Yeah,
in your mind.
because so the one thing as well is I was working for other people and it was very stressful.
You're always scheduled, you're on a clock.
Yeah, and I didn't have any freedom, right? Whereas I have freedom somewhat. Also, I'm very tied up, but I also have freedom. So then I thought, well, I'd rather make my own stress. And so now I make my own stress. So it's stressful, but I can work within that.
Yeah.
So
obviously my podcast title being In Light of the Gospel, can you tie, like I've often wondered, how many Christians does the cross actually affect their day-to-day experiences, right? Like I think of my wife, I love her as Christ loved the church. That's how I'm supposed to love her, right? And there's many, many times now, knowing the gospel like I do, I have a difficulty in the marriage and I see what she's done wrong. She's hurt me in some way and I think she's clearly at fault. And I find, okay, well, here now, this is the gospel opportunity. It's actually when you're being wrong or when stress is upon you, when difficulties arise, that's the best opportunity to live according to the gospel, to walk out the gospel. So can you tie any connections to your business, your success, to your understanding of the gospel?
Well, the one thing I always come back to as well is, like, we've been given grace, so we give grace. Maybe it's rather the, even answer, like, how's the verse? It's not. But anyway, not responding with anger, like when different principles like that. And I think, just knowing that God, I can trust God with everything. And I think that was one of the big things, that I can trust God with everything going on, and I don't have to get too riled up. And
I know the passage in 2 Corinthians talks about Christ who gave up his riches, right? He became poor like one of us so that we could be rich. And I often think about that when we go through really difficult times and it feels like everything is stressful and hard and it doesn't feel like it's going to make it through and all that. You can always recognize that someone else has already taken the brunt of all the weight of the world, of your sin upon himself. And that often lifts you out of those circumstances too, where you realize, okay, this isn't the end. Yeah. It doesn't mean everything, right? But anyway, I know you have several books. I don't know if you want to go there. Several books that you've read that have really impacted the way that you think about business. Yeah,
so I would say
Probably Man in Babylon.
Richest Man in Babylon is a good one.
Good entrepreneurial style book,
and
right?
Very simple as far as how to start. Not necessarily how to start, but getting the capital to start, right? And there's no easy way, and that's one of the things I always, if I briefly go back to that, I always thought that having a business, I could, one day it would just
You'll
happen.
Catch a break.
I'll get a break. And that was my mindset before I went bankrupt, and then I went bankrupt. And
you didn't catch that
break.
Didn't.
That was the break I caught. But then I realized that, going back to this book, Richest Man in Babylon, that I had to work. Like, don't wait for something big to happen. Just start and slowly build it.
You have to.
You have to start somewhere.
I know a lot of people would consider, maybe look at you and think, well, that was easy. Overnight success. Started a little company in this tiny little shack, and now you got this big rented place in the old Imperial building, and it just, everything's working out for you. But it's been how many years now since you started this new business?
It's been since, well, actually, 2007 is when I did the first kitchen, and that was your parents' kitchen.
Okay.
So
that was with this new
Stone. No, sorry.
It wasn't considered Stone Mill yet.
No. So that was IDW.
Oh,
that
yes.
was in the beginning. But so this business here is 5 years. 5 years in April it was. So
yeah, it didn't just happen overnight.
No.
But you steadily...
Yeah. So the whole time period that I've been in business, it's only been working for the last 5 years. So...
Okay, so Richest Man in Babylon, not a Christian book, but very good on showing you how you have to take capital, increase it, and increase it, constantly moving forward, right? You're not just haphazardly hoping that the business will perform. Yeah,
no, for sure. It has to be on purpose. So the next book would be The E-Myth Revisited.
The E-Myth?
So that is the entrepreneurial myth. So
okay,
and that's
the E-Myth.
Yeah, E-Myth Revisited. He's got a lot of different books on...
What's the author?
Michael Gerber.
Michael Gerber, okay.
So one of the main things in there is you create your business like a franchise. Not that it is a franchise, but structure it that way because, so systems for everything, right? So it's a structured system. Everybody knows what to do, and then you go forward. That's huge to be able to do that. We're not nearly there, but we try to take a little bit of...
And then in those systems, you've been training certain guys to take care of a certain thing, and then once they get good at that, they move on to something else, or they just become very proficient.
Yeah, they just either...
Or is that not even what you mean by systems?
Systems is, so basically their big take is from McDonald's. So they have one guy, so you break down the whole job into many little parts, and then you put one guy on this little part, so that if he's all of a sudden not there, it's very easy to replace him.
Put somebody else in.
Yeah. In our business, it doesn't quite work that way. There's larger parts that takes time to learn. So, but at least we've broken it down.
Which, if I can interject, I like that because McDonald's employees are completely discards, right? Like they can replace them at a moment's notice. Where I've noticed that you really value your guys.
Yeah.
And are trying to keep them content and happy and moving forward.
Yeah. No, actually, I think we have a really good team. I'm very happy with everyone. Obviously, there's always things you got to work through, but I feel it's almost a bit of a second family, right?
Yeah. I spent a lot of time with those guys.
So, but very good guys. They're all...
So systems.
So another thing that I think is really big that I learned from that book was that the goal is not to have a business. That's not the end goal.
Okay.
So we all have our lives with our families, and you want to give your family the resources to enjoy life together in whatever aspect it is, right? So the business is only a means for that. So
interesting. So
if you focus your whole life on just growing a business, well, that you've sort of missed the mark, right?
Yeah.
But
I've noticed a lot of guys lately who work 60 and 80 hours a week and who clearly want to be good dads, but do not have the capacity to do it because they're coming home at 6 and 8 o'clock at night. The kids going to bed at 8 or 9 o'clock, whatever it might be. Yeah. And there's literally like an hour or two a day at the most where they're in the same house because they're getting up before the family's there. And years ago, business was done in such a way where almost everybody lived on farms. You know, look back 200 years, you woke up, you went and did chores, you come back in, the wife's got breakfast on the table, you eat breakfast with the family, you take the little boys and you're back out on the field and you're constantly interacting and raising the kids, not in this professional environment where you're sitting down with them, but you're doing life with them, right? Yeah. And I've noticed you have your son on the job site. He's a young man, very young still. But he's proven himself to be a young man, right? Yeah. No, they both, Hudson and Elisha, both like to come to the shop and so a lot of times they're working in the shop with the rest of the guys. I'm out, right? Mm-hmm. So there's times where I take them with me, but at least we have the freedom to have them come out. Come away from home. And they're seeing where your work comes from, where the provisions come from. So rather than doing business to be financially successful, you're doing business to provide a structure for the family to thrive. Yeah. That's kind of the idea. Yeah. So that we have the means to
to live the
financially, freedom, time-wise.
Yeah,
your schedule is flexible.
Don't have quite that yet, but I mean, we do definitely more flexible than if I worked a job 9 or 7 to 5 somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to get out of there, but I can easily change my schedule to make things work. So, which is really nice.
So how do you then, with the busyness of starting a business, how do you balance the stress of work and leave it there, perhaps come home, spend time with family? Have you structured that or found a system that works for you there?
To a point, right? There's always part of it that, you're sitting Sunday, doing whatever, and all of a sudden you remember something that didn't happen or was supposed to happen. But I think for myself, a lot of, I can turn it off to a degree. My wife might say differently.
How many hours a week do you think you would usually put in?
I'm usually home by 5, so
start at 7,
sometimes a little earlier. So yeah, regular
Normal
45, 50 hours a week. There's occasional Saturdays where we'll work, but I try not to. I don't want the guys to have to work on the weekends because, well, I don't really prefer to either. So that has been what we've tried to go for all the time. But
so the systems and the structure of the business has allowed you to make the money that you need, or has just organized the business in such a way where it runs smoothly?
Yeah, I would say the latter, in that impacts the money as well,
okay.
Right? So.
And how about finances then? You've been a lot more careful. You've learned to budget and be precise with your amounts and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. We had to budget after the bankruptcy. You have no other way but to. They force you to.
And what do you mean by that?
So you have to watch every penny you spend after
Okay.
that, and you have to give them a report, which was good for us. Which
And you've
I
kept
was
that
never. No. So you sort of figure it out, and then we do have everything on paper. We know exactly every week what's going where.
Personally,
or
the business?
Not the business, but that we sort of know the percentages.
Mm-hmm.
So we watch that. We can see every month what's coming, what came in, and what went out. So it's always month by month. And so I think that's a lot of businesses. When you're new at it, you don't do that, but it's basically the health of your business, right? So
there's a couple verses I wanted to read before we get off this topic. You mentioned that business was not about getting rich or not about being wealthy, but about providing joy and happiness and a way for your family to thrive and your community to thrive.
Yeah.
And it extends beyond just you
definitely.
personally, right?
Yeah.
There's 2 passages in 1 Timothy chapter 6. The first part says, "But they that will be rich, those that have the desire to be rich, fall into temptation and a snare and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. But thou, O man of God, flee these things, and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. Fight the good fight of faith. Lay hold on eternal life, whereunto thou art also called, and hast professed a good profession before many witnesses." What do you think about that?
Well, I guess I would have a bit of a different take on it than I used to. What was the first part there again?
They that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare.
I think that right there is, there's many people that want to be rich and they get sucked into all kinds of get rich quick schemes, lotteries, all that sort of thing.
Even jumping into a business thinking it's just going to boom and we're going to be successful.
Yeah, any way that you try to accumulate quickly, or I think that's what it is talking about, rather than the Proverbs take on doing like what is wise and doing the right thing. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. I think I learned a lot of that.
Yeah.
Be diligent. Keep going. Don't stop, right? So there's no easy...
Proverbs 23:4, "Labor not to be rich, cease from thine own wisdom." A faithful man, Proverbs 28:20, "A faithful man shall abound with blessings, but he that maketh haste to be rich shall not be innocent."
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Just, I'm going to get rich. I'm going to get rich.
Yeah.
And so it's weird to me, interesting to me almost, that a lot of the men who are really successful in business are not in it for the money. They're doing it because they love doing this thing and they're finding a good way to provide for their family. And then the result is they end up rich. Because if you go a little further in that same chapter, in 1 Timothy, it says that charge them that are rich in this world, that they be not high-minded nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who giveth us richly all things to enjoy, that they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate, laying up in store for themselves a good foundation, and so on and so forth. So he clearly was not condemning the idea of being rich. Mm-hmm. There are rich Christians, very successful Christians, and he says just don't trust in those uncertain riches. Yeah. They could be gone in a moment. Yeah,
exactly. I think, that's I think a very important thing that I realized, that the passage where go not say tomorrow we're going to make this gain and that, but rather say tomorrow, Lord willing, we're going to go to this city and make gain. So the idea there was to remember that whatever you plan, God can change that, and that's okay, right? And so I think I've really taken to that as well. Just God can do what He wants with it. This is our plans, and I think that was a big difference too. Is I specifically planned what the steps would be to get where we were going, right?
Okay.
So but in all thy ways, commit thy ways unto the Lord, and He'll direct your paths, right? So I don't know. Everything takes effort, and what you sow, you will reap, right?
Right.
But
there's a couple other little proverbs here. Proverbs 22:29. Seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean men. So it's clear that we should be diligent in our business. We should be studious and hardworking. Some people have taken that as an excuse. Don't desire to be rich. So then, then I'll just be satisfied with being half in, half out.
Yeah.
That's not the idea. The Proverbs are very clear. And then also even in 1 Thessalonians 4, it says that you study to be quiet and to do your own business and work with your own hands as we have commanded, that we may walk honestly toward them that are without, and that ye may have lack of nothing.
Yeah.
That's the New Testament. That's not just an Old Testament proverb.
Yeah.
He doesn't want you to be lacking anything.
Yeah.
Not that anybody who is lacking is somehow out of the will of God. There are sufferings, poor Christians all over the world. But if you have the means at your disposal, who doesn't want to work shouldn't eat, those kinds of principles.
Yeah, there's many reasons why you should do business. But it's, being diligent, you just keep going and don't focus on the money. And just for one, the big thing that we like about it is even providing work for different people. And one of the things was too is I never like working at certain places. They're rough places to work. So we want to give our employees a good experience to work.
So
purpose. Okay, and then even aside from the money, if somebody's going into business, whatever, I think it gives you purpose, right? So I know we are as Christians, we have hope, but a lot of Christians also live sort of aimless lives.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you have a family, if you're not going anywhere, it's stale, right? So I think for me, it gave me a bit of direction, and it helped me to learn things that I needed to learn, leadership and all that. I'm by no means where he was talking, a diligent man you'll see him before kings. That's
right.
A long way off. But I think
it's neat to see that the steps you've put in place, the systems that you're working now, it's progressing. You've started to see the incremental change and success. You've been able to rent more and more space at your place where you do your cabinetry.
Yeah.
And you've been able to hire more and more guys on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been really good. I think everybody is pulling for that, pulling together for that. And I'm, in a sense, not shy about, telling some of them anyway that, it is be good for them to be, not necessarily be on their own, but I can't tell them that they can't not do their own thing, right? So, you try to give them a little bit, but at the same time, I want them to stay with me. They're
Right.
really good, but you have to be honest too with that. Getting a little off track there, but I think like a big thing is it gives you purpose in life too, something you go for, and then you can exercise your faith as well through that, and also it gives your family direction and purpose too. Not all necessarily going towards the business, but we rally together, right? It's pulled us together.
Each relationship we have is just an image or a picture of the larger relationships that we have, and ultimately it's the society, right? So sometimes I think we as Christians, we think that the Christian duty in business is preaching the gospel. Go out and make disciples. That's all we should be doing.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more to it, because when I love my wife, I'm exemplifying the gospel. When I raise my children well, I'm also taking what the peace and joy God has brought me, and I'm bringing it into my children, raising them up to be structured and disciplined and godly, hopefully, right? Mm-hmm. And then I take my family and I relate to other families like yours, and we have cohesive, good relationships, and that broadens into work. And then if your work is permeated with this joy of relationship and love and peace, and then you're interacting with your customers, and then your customers, and it should permeate all of society. Yeah. There's a quote that I should have looked up. Martin Luther talked about the even from the milkmaid to the person in the king's house, or whatever. So anytime you're providing a living for the people around you and providing a good environment for that living, you're doing the Lord's work, because God is ultimately the one that feeds the people, right? Yeah. He is the cattle on 1,000 hills, and He's the one that it's His job to feed and to sustain humanity. So when we are integral parts of that feeding and providing and giving sustenance to, we're actually doing what God has told us to do. Yeah. It's not just going out preaching the gospel. Yeah. But the gospel gets in there with all of that. Yeah, right? With all of our life, right? But that's one thing it took me a long time to realize that and to get comfortable with. It always felt sort of wrong to go into business. Like, I couldn't separate my motives, right? Almost like business was carnal. Yeah. So, but it isn't, right? So there's, like, when you offer service to another fellow human, you're serving God, so to say. And whatever we do with all your might, right? Whatever your hand finds to do with all your might. So and I think I really enjoy it. I think one of the biggest things about business too is the connection you get with customers, and just the satisfaction of giving them a good product, and just we often come away gaining friends, right? Mm-hmm. That's how it most of the time is. Almost all your connections are people that you now would associate with, and you'd feel comfortable with saying, you're not hiding from them. Yeah. Oh yeah. A lot of people do business in such a way. I remember working for a company years ago. You worked there for a while too. I won't mention the name, but they had almost no referrals. They were busy because of their marketing, but they had almost no referrals because anytime you were on site, they were like, "We like you guys. We're glad you're here, but we hate the company you're working for. We never do business with them again," and so on. But to know that you can greet, your small town, you do most of your work locally, and you're going to see these people at the store and wherever else you go. So you stand behind your work and you do it as to your utmost, right? Yeah, no, we definitely don't always get it right, but we try to correct it. So, but it's so that alone it's a lot of fun. It's rewarding, I would say. So you would encourage others to go into business? I think so. Like, obviously, there's people that it's just not cut out for them, right? But I think it's very rewarding, and there's a lot of things. Even apart from just running the business, it shapes who you are, changes you, it exercises you as, in confidence. I was a very, very insecure person, as a kid, and I think a lot of people are, right? Obviously, you have to find your way, but a lot of it, because of the interactions you're forced to have, it changes you, right? It helps you to mature. And I would say, just from observing you for the last 15 years, I've always respected you, I've always appreciated you, but I feel like almost feel dwarfed by your abilities and your success, and where I just like, oh man, what in the world happened here? All of a sudden he got his act together and things were clear to him. He's got a mission. He's on purpose doing this thing, right? And it's really nice to see. And then I'm looking at, we could start a whole nother conversation. I never used that word. But we could start another whole conversation about what I'm seeing in your family. You and your wife seem to have a great relationship. You've been renovating your own home on top of all of this. You've had a terrible miscarriage some years ago, which we don't have to talk about right now. But I'm seeing your boys, you've struggled with certain things, and then you've disciplined and you've slowly walked through certain ways. And just, I don't know, I've seen a lot of growth, and it's been a real blessing for me to watch.
Interesting to hear. But yeah, no, I would say that there's been a lot of growth. But yeah, we're still just moving forward, right? We're not... I wouldn't see myself necessarily as having arrived anywhere, but yeah, it's a joy to just look back a little bit and see that we are making progress. So,
now I'm seeing that we're getting pretty close to the time where I'd like to stop the conversation, but there's so many areas where you probably had already thought in your mind, this is something I really want to share. Can you think of something like that now where you're like, man, he didn't ask anything about this and we kind of missed that spot? Advice for young people maybe, or business, or...
Yeah, one of the things I think that most people tend to not start something, and it doesn't have to be business, in general in life, because their vision is so broad that, well, it's impossible,
I can't even start.
But the thing is, I think a big thing is just to start, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, even with this podcast, it's a small scale thing, but it's like I put it off for over a year because I didn't know when to start, how to start.
Yeah, like they say, even with writing a book, you do 1 page a day. At the end of the year, you have 365 page book. Yeah. So in general in life, I think life is broken down so finely into each day. If you do a little bit each day in a year's time, you've come a long way. And I think, that being said, you have to have a direction. Like, you have to have, you're going somewhere. What is the mental image that you have in your mind? You have to have a mental image in your mind.
And it can't be just a big bank account.
No. I mean, no. Like, there's some people that have that, and they, they'll find whatever means to achieve that, but you have to have multiple visions in your head too.
Has your vision played out the way you had hoped?
It's still playing out. I think my vision is pretty small, but I mean, it is playing out probably faster than I hoped, and maybe I just didn't.
So you are an overnight success.
Well, no. It's just, I don't know, I think now a lot of things just compiled and worked out, right? So, I obviously God's blessing is given too when, all the, you do what, you just take the necessary steps and God blesses it, I think. But, yeah, it's, have a vision. Go for something, right? And I think a lot of people just need purpose in their lives, and so with that you can then reach out further, right?
Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly how to wrap this up, but I've seen you minister to others and serve others. You used to help with the youth group and things like that too, and now I've seen you're a bit of a shift where I could see you potentially leading and walking beside young guys, entrepreneurs, trying to help them get structure and set up their systems and all that. Is that something that would potentially be in the future?
I'm not sure, but
I want to all of a sudden put you on there, and all of a sudden people are calling you.
I do enjoy that. Like, I do get together with some guys and we talk about different things, and obviously I've had different experiences where you fail and you know what not to do. So a lot of times you can actually teach from what not to do. You can learn a lot from that. Sure. So, but yeah, no, I do enjoy that. I don't know where that'll ever go, but I do have somewhat of an interest in that.
All right.
So,
well, I've seen Willy struggle. I've seen him be down and kind of depressed almost, where it seemed like for some years you were really discouraged and kind of somber and not too joyful. And then I've seen the gospel liberate you to the point where if I can put my assessment on it, I think you being freed by the gospel has had a tremendous impact on the way that you do business. Because you're not constantly stressing over, am I doing this enough? Am I doing that enough? Am I worrying? Or, am I doing this? Am I living up to this standard or that standard? But recognizing that you are loved, that you are appreciated by God, that, in spite of all your failings, Christ died for you.
Yeah.
And you're free from all that, the bondage of sin and the penalties and all that. So now you're liberated to go and do business, to go and serve others. You have something to offer.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's very well put. Yeah. No, I definitely have the liberty, whereas I wouldn't have before. There's too many things to work through. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm sure someday in the future we'll have to have you on again because there's so many things we could touch on. And for now, I appreciate you guys tuning in. God bless.
See ya.